The king thought she was his human pet, until she became the legendary white wolf, Seraphine. Seraphine had never begged for anything in her life. Not when she was found half dead on the frozen border road. Not when the palace guards dragged her through the tall iron gates of Vaelthorn, and certainly not when King Caius Vane looked down at her from his throne and decided, with barely a glance, that she was interesting enough to keep. She was 17 years old then, a girl with silver white hair and eyes the color of ice in winter. Human, everyone said. Completely, plainly human, and in the kingdom of Vaelthorn, where werewolf royalty ruled everything, and humans were considered lesser than the mud on a wolf lord's boot, that made her worth almost nothing. Almost. The king had his reasons for keeping her, though he never explained them to anyone. He gave her a small room near the servants' quarters. He had her dressed in clean clothes. He allowed her to walk the lower halls of the palace freely, as long as she did not go above the second floor without permission. The court assumed she was a curiosity to him, a stray with unusual coloring that he had decided to collect, the way some people collect strange stones or rare birds. Seraphine never corrected this assumption. She let them believe whatever they liked. What she did instead was watch. She studied every face in that palace. She learned which lords were afraid of the king and which ones only pretended to be. She learned which servants knew secrets and how to get them talking. She learned the layout of every hallway, the schedule of every guard, and the names of every wolf noble who visited the throne room on business. She listened at doorways. She read every book in the lower library. She made herself invisible in the way that only truly patient people can, by giving everyone around her exactly what they expected to see. A quiet, harmless girl who caused no trouble. King Caius called her to his study every few weeks. He would ask her questions about the books she had read, about the things she had observed in the palace, about her opinions on matters that had nothing to do with her. She answered him honestly every time, not with flattery, not with performance, but with calm and careful honesty. He found it unusual. Most people in his court told him what he wanted to hear. Seraphine told him what she actually thought, and the difference was so noticeable that it kept bringing him back. He did not treat her kindly, exactly, but he did not treat her cruelly either. He existed somewhere in the cold space between the two, which Seraphine understood better than warmth would have been. Warmth could be a trap. Cold distance could be navigated. The trouble, when it came, arrived in the form of Lord Draven. Draven was the king's chancellor, a broad-shouldered wolf lord with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. He had managed the kingdom's finances and political relationships for 15 years, and he had done it by making himself indispensable to Caius. He was good at his job. He was also deeply, quietly corrupt, and he had spent years making sure no one looked closely enough at his books to find out. Seraphine had been looking closely at his books for 8 months. She was not obvious about it. She gathered information the way rain gathers in a well, slowly, patiently, drop by drop, until the well is full, and no one noticed when it happened. She found the missing funds from the border villages. She found the records of raids on human settlements that had been ordered without the king's knowledge and blamed on rogue clan activity. She found the names of 2 palace officials who had died of unexplained illness shortly after threatening to report discrepancies in the treasury accounts. She kept everything she found in a leather journal hidden under a loose stone in the floor of her small room. She was not ready to use it yet. She was waiting for the right moment, the way a person waits for a storm to break before they step outside, not because they are afraid of the storm, but because they understand weather. Draven noticed her before she was ready. He could not have known exactly what she had found, but he was intelligent enough to understand that the quiet human girl who never seemed to bother anyone was, in fact, bothering him. He felt it the way prey feels something in the woods before they see it. A tightening, an awareness that something was wrong. He acted first. At the midwinter banquet, a large formal dinner with visiting noble families from 3 neighboring clans, Lord Draven stood up during the meal and announced to the hall that the king's human guest should be properly introduced to their visitors, as was tradition when the palace housed a notable curiosity. He said it with a wide smile. He meant every word of it as an insult. Seraphine was brought into the hall. The room was full of powerful wolves, all of them watching her, with expressions ranging from amusement to contempt. Draven gestured for her to kneel before the visiting dignitaries, and the room went quiet, waiting to see what she would do. She knelt, but as she looked up from the floor, her eyes found King Caius at the head of the table. He had not stopped the moment. He was watching her with an expression she could not read, and she held his gaze for 3 full seconds, with an expression that was not shame and was not anger. It was something quieter and more unsettling than either of those things. It was patience. Deep, absolute, unbothered patience. Something in the king's chest felt strange for the rest of that evening. He did not speak about it to anyone. Seraphine returned to her room that night, pressed her hand flat against her chest, and felt, for the first time, something move beneath her ribs. Not pain exactly, more like a door, shifting on very old hinges, testing whether it could still open. She did not know what it meant yet. She filed it away and went to sleep. 3 weeks later, a rival wolf clan sent 2 armed wolves into the palace through the underground passage near the east kitchen. Their target was the king. They came at night, moving quickly through the lower halls with their wolves barely held beneath their skin. They would have reached Caius without difficulty, except that Seraphine was in the lower hall at that exact hour, returning a book to the library, and she stepped around a corner directly into their path. What happened next was difficult for her to explain afterward, mostly because she did not fully understand it herself. She should have been easy to deal with. She was human, unarmed, and small. But when the first wolf reached for her, something in her blood rose to meet him, with a force that made no sense. She did not transform. She did not fight. She simply stood her ground, and whatever came off her in that moment made both wolves freeze and then turn and run. Not slowly, running, the way animals run when they encounter something in the dark that their instincts cannot categorize. Seraphine stood in the empty corridor, shaking slightly, and looked at her hands. Her veins, faintly visible under the skin of her forearms, were glowing silver. Then the adrenaline left her body all at once, and she collapsed. She woke up 3 days later, in a room she did not recognize. It was warmer and better furnished than her own. King Caius was sitting in the chair beside the bed, asleep, which told her he had been there for a while. She did not say anything when she saw him. She looked at him for a long time in the pale morning light, this man who had kept her like a trinket for 3 years, and had also, apparently, sat beside her bed for 3 days. She could not make those 2 things fit into a single simple feeling, so she set them both aside and focused on what she needed to do next. As soon as she was strong enough to walk, she went to find Elder Mara. She had known the name for years. It was scratched in tiny letters inside the lining of the old tattered coat she had been wearing when the border guards found her, the only thing she had carried out of whatever life she lived before Vaelthorn. She had never acted on it because she had not yet needed to. Now she needed to. Elder Mara lived in a small stone house at the very edge of the city, where the buildings thinned out and the old forest began. She was very old and completely blind, and she opened the door before Seraphine knocked. She told Seraphine the truth without being asked. Seraphine was not human. She had never been human. She was the last living blood descendant of the White Wolf of Ashvale, a being so ancient it existed before the wolf kingdoms, before the wars, before the long, slow history that had resulted in a world where people like Draven held power over people like the farmers in the border villages. The White Wolf was not a monster or a legend used to frighten children. It was a guardian, a creature of pure instinct and deep justice, the kind of power the world produces very rarely, and only when something has been wrong for a very long time. Seraphine's ability had been sealed at birth by someone who feared what she would become. 3 years of difficulty, and then the wound in the corridor, had broken the seal. Her wolf was waking up. Seraphine walked back to the palace in the early evening light, and she made a decision. She could leave. No one in Vaelthorn could stop her now, not truly. She could walk out of the gates and disappear into the world, and whatever she became, she would become it somewhere else, somewhere without memories of kneeling on stone floors in front of people who considered her furniture. She chose to stay. She had a journal hidden under a loose stone in her floor, and she was not done with it yet. She began training in the cellars at night, learning to hold the silver light in her blood steady, learning to call it and let it go. It was not difficult exactly. It was more like remembering something she had always known. General Thessa, the king's most senior military commander, found her there on the third night and stood in the doorway, watching for a long time, before sitting down on an old crate and saying, quietly and without threat, that she wanted to understand what Seraphine was. Seraphine told her, all of it. Thessa was silent for a long time after that. Then she said she had spent 20 years loyal to a crown that treated a large part of its population as objects, and she wanted to know if there was a better direction to point that loyalty. Seraphine said there might be. They shook hands in the dark of the cellar, and that was how Seraphine gained her first ally inside the palace walls. Draven moved against her, 6 weeks later. He brought evidence to the High Court, fabricated neatly, presented with confidence, that Seraphine had been contaminating the palace water supply. It was the kind of charge that was almost impossible to defend against without proof, and proof was hard to find quickly. Caius, standing in the throne room with his court watching, and his chancellor beside him, made the worst decision of his reign. He ordered her held pending trial. For a moment, just one moment, Seraphine looked at him, not with anger, not with the pleading expression he might have expected, with grief, simple and clear, and completely honest, the way she was always completely honest. It lasted only a second. Then she walked with the guards without a word. The trial was held in the great hall, open to the full court. Draven presented his evidence, with the confident pleasure of a man who believes he has already won. Seraphine stood before the assembled nobles of Vaelthorn in silver chains, which were used on her as the final insult. Silver chains were designed to suppress lycanthrope power, and using them on a human was a way of saying she was not even worth a human's restraint. The chains began to smoke the moment they touched her wrists. The hall went very quiet. The silver did not burn her. She burned it. Her blood recognized the material and responded to it the way a river responds to a stone, flowing around it, through it, dissolving it. The chains fell to the floor in pieces, and the silver light in her veins was visible through her skin, steady and bright and completely calm. And then Seraphine made her choice. She did not do it in rage. She did not do it to frighten anyone, though it frightened everyone in the hall. She let go of the last piece of herself she had been holding back, and the transformation was nothing like a wolf's shift. There was no violence in it. The silver light simply expanded, quiet and enormous and inevitable, the way dawn expands across a sky, and when it faded, the white wolf stood in the great hall of Vaelthorn. Every wolf in the room went to their knees. They did not choose to. Their wolves simply recognized something ancient and bowed to it before their minds could argue. King Caius Vane was the last to kneel, but he knelt. Seraphine shifted back to herself. She straightened the plain clothes she was wearing. She looked at Draven with an expression that was not unkind and was absolutely unmovable, and she said that she had a journal he should know about. She presented everything she had collected over 2 years. The missing funds, the raids, the names of the 2 men who had died. Thessa stood beside her and confirmed the military records that supported it. The court was silent, in the way rooms go silent, when everyone realizes at the same moment that they have been managed by one person for a very long time. Draven lost his title before the end of the afternoon. That evening, Caius came to find her in her small room near the servants' quarters. She had not moved to better chambers. She was sitting by the window watching the first snow of the year fall on the city, and she did not seem surprised to see him. He asked her why she had stayed, even when she could have left. She told him she had stayed because she needed to finish what she had started. And then she told him something that was harder to say, which was that she had also stayed because she had watched him, for 3 years, in all the small quiet moments between the public ones, and she had seen things worth believing in. Not the king, the man, the one who had sat beside her bed for 3 days and never mentioned it. He did not say anything for a long time after that. Then he asked her if she was staying now. She looked at him across the small room, with the snow falling white and slow outside the window, and she said simply, "For now." It was the most honest answer she had ever given him. It was also, though he would not have been able to explain why, the most comforting thing anyone had ever said to Caius Vane in his entire life. Outside, Vaelthorn lay under its first snow of winter. It covered the streets and the rooftops and the long palace walls equally, the way real change always comes, quietly, and all at once, until nothing looks quite the same as it did before.